So let's get started. I'll go to John. Let's say, what's next in the investment in the sector? Are we still going to stay with the same main verticals around towers, fiber, data center? Is it digital adjacencies? But where would you see 2025 in the next few years is for this industry, and what type of focus for yourself and just for general?
For the sector. Well, thank you, by the way. This is always a fun panel. It's a great event. So thanks for having me back to talk about everything I think and go on tangents. Look, in terms of the space, it's a very open-ended question. The fundamentals of this space are so strong, right? I mean, data centers, fiber, cell towers, small cells, these cornerstones right now of digital infrastructure are all doing incredibly well, and there's great opportunities there. I think that continues. We could talk a lot, I'm sure we will in this discussion, the nuance about the winners and losers in those categories, because it's not, again, one size fits all. You're going to see, I think, greater distinctions about performance and outperformance. But fundamentally, I think that will continue to be the focus on the digital infrastructure strategy. That being said, as we define the space, I think there are adjacencies we always look at. We look at, there was an interesting update here on subsea cables just a moment ago. We look at that. We look at what's happening on the satellite side. We also think about digital content, digital media, which is sort of another extension of the endpoint into the community. But really for us, and I think for investors in digital infrastructure, it's valuable to think about that ecosystem. How do all these pieces fit together? The most important thing as I think about data centers is it's not just a building in a vacuum. It's got to be connected, and it's got to be connected logically to other data centers, to endpoints, to the fiber that is the nexus to bring those together. I don't think that fundamental cornerstone or bedrock of what we're doing is going to change.
Appreciate that. And Gautam, maybe you have a little bit of a different perspective as more of a general infrastructure and a digital infrastructure. So how maybe some of those connect and across.
Look, so first of all, thank you and aloha. It's fantastic to be here again. I think the industry has converged with the massive demand that is required to move, frankly, electrons around. You today see a massive convergence from energy to data center to photons, right? So the entire value chain needs to get provided. By the way, that includes water, that includes everything else, including workforce. So I think the space has grown. The capital requirements for the top 5 companies far exceeds oil and gas. So that requires a lot of capital and it requires a lot of skill sets. So I do see power as an obvious sort of bundling to produce that intelligence. The people have chips, people have connectivity, as John correctly pointed out. Then you have to move the signals around. So I think today the world is all-encompassing and very large and frankly quite complicated.
Yeah, I think we'll get more into the power on the data center side when we ask a few of those. But really, Will, on a question of that is more on the general investing side is like, one, it's like where it's going, but really about capital allocation and across different regions. As we've seen, and we'll talk about specifically data center later, but just the general digital infra, the US is getting the lion's share.
Yeah.
But what do you see as coming out of your fund originally out of the Australia, New Zealand region and then going into the rest of the globe? How does that affect your capital allocation and your LPs to look at different regions?
Yeah, I mean, we're infrastructure investors, so there's things we can invest in and things that we can't. So overall, as we think about the next period, and we should look back and say, look, why has so much capital been attracted to data centers? Well, in part because the customer set are prepared to write very long-term leases on those assets, which as an investor then gives you a high degree of certainty into those cash flows. So as we look forward, as you think about your business, as we think about working collaboratively with the hyperscalers, think about what other parts of the digital ecosystem can we start to put in place contracting structures that look a little bit like that. And it won't be every business, it won't be every sector, but if we do that, you'll find there'll be an amazing flow of capital. Because we know the investment challenge is absolutely huge, so we need capital in the sector. But you need to know that infrastructure investors can put their capital in certain pockets, but they can't take certain risks. So then to think about whereabouts in the world, we look globally now about where to put the incremental investment dollar, and we're looking for the conditions to be right. And the conditions in the United States right now are really strong. You think about the entire ecosystem supporting that infrastructure investment. it's incredibly strong. You've got the biggest corporations in the world. You've got the hyperscalers largely based out of this region, and you've just got an incredible amount of innovation that's happening around the sector. So I think that the United States will attract a disproportionate share of investment, but the challenge goes out to everyone else out there. Like, how do we attract more of the industry to our regions? Because I think now's the time to do it. If you as a country, as a nation, can attract an incremental piece of investment in the infrastructure right now, I think you'll have an enduring advantage. So it's almost like a challenge right now.
Yeah. And Jan, I mean, as EQT, you're not just digital and infrastructure, you're general private equity, and through acquisitions, you've grown a global footprint as your firm. How do you guys look at it? Is there, kind of reviews, one against the other, or allocations to a certain region? How do you guys look in general, especially around digital or infrastructure?
Yeah, thank you, and hi everyone. Very nice to be here. I think that the digitalization trend is so strong globally that we're looking at it everywhere across the globe. We don't have a fixed allocation formula where we want to invest. We have built our teams in line with where we want to invest. So largely North America and Europe. You cannot move around infrastructure very easily, so you have to be in a reliable regulatory framework. But I think that we're still very early in the early innings of AI deployments, and of course naturally that's happening in the US first. There's relatively, even though it's getting scarce, there is abundant and relatively cheap power available here, cheap natural gas, which is an advantage. Ultimately, though, just like everything, it will go where the customers are and where the growth is. So we're in the early stage. It's starting to happen in the US. We're seeing it coming to Europe. Where we're doing some early stage AI type data center deployments. We're building a lot of fiber for the hyperscalers across our companies in Europe, but by far the most is still in the US, and it's not because it's not attractive to do it elsewhere. It's just easier to do it here, and it's coming to Asia. I mean, there's a lot of people, a lot of economic growth in Asia. So I do think it's coming over time. We're still early days in the growth cycle. And this will continue for the next 10 years.
And I think it's been the way for 20 years. We've seen first adoption in North America, right, and then expanding across Europe and then into South America and into Asia. So I think that playbook continues for all the reasons around access to capital, regulation, rule of law, right, comfort with the customers who are anchored here. I think it'll continue.
Yeah, and so that kind of leads into another question about is, investment going into the sector. What are some of the roadblocks that you guys are seeing today compared to 2 or 3 years ago? And maybe Gautam, if you wanted to kind of talk about some of those.
Look, I mean, the one that is often talked about is actually power. So you heard Bill talk about it. It's everywhere in the news. People are coming up with innovative solutions, small nuclear reactors, other things. But it's not just power, right? So when you put these large facilities, you do take the excess power, the reserve margin from that community, right? So you have to replenish it. So that there is a pushback. There is a pushback from the community. If it's not happening right away, it will happen within a few years. So you have to think about it in a much more sustainable manner. It's also transmission. If you wanted to buy a substation or put a substation in this country today, the wait is 2 to 3 years just to get your equipment, right? So I think the bottlenecks are coming just because the US actually had no grid capacity increase. The grid actually went minus 1% for the last 20 plus years. So, when you start that engine, all kinds of, cogs kind of break out. And so I think grid is a very big part of this issue. And it's not always easy. It needs hundreds of stakeholders to get a grid in or get a distribution system inside a community. Sometimes takes 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, and Will, as I said, coming from one region as you've kind of expanded, and especially doing a lot of general infrastructure, are you seeing more government roadblocks? Is it, as you say, local community? Is it capital? As you said, the allocation?
I think it's all of that. I think it's everything, and I think that's part of the challenge. I think the biggest roadblock we've got today is actually to deliver some of the infrastructure, particularly around data centers, requires an incredible amount of cooperation and coordination. Yeah. In fact, in this room in coming years, are we going to have colleagues on the electricity transmission side sitting with us and talking with us? Are we going to have people from the power generation side because you kind of need to smush all those people in the room and get them cooperating to make this thing run now. Go back 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, if you wanted to build a data center, you could just get on and do it. Yes, you had to go through planning, but you didn't have to think about your grid connection with a lot of detail. You didn't necessarily have to think about, is there a PPA market for clean electrons? Today, you didn't have to think about water. Today, we got to think about all of those things, and we got to bring them all together. So this biggest single roadblock is humans trying to cooperate and make that stuff happen.
Maybe even going up 10,000 feet. The challenge we have fundamentally right now in this industry is it's growing so quickly, we can't manage the growth, right? I mean, fundamentally, if you think about every component, from the CapEx dollars being spent by the top hyperscale investors buying GPUs, chips, to the amount of data center investment requires, to the scale of the energy footprint. Again, as you just described it, you used to be able to go to your utility and have maybe an 18-month planning cycle, but you'd get a data center, you get the power. Yeah. Today, the scale of this is disruptive, right? And I think right now we're talking about power, access, and the availability when it comes online. But right behind that, it's going to be supply chain and logistics. How many engineers does it take, right, to build all the gigawatts we're talking about? I'm not sure there's enough, right? I mean, it's going to be a challenge at sort of that fundamental level where we have to rethink and think out of the box our approach to solving this problem at this scale.
Yeah, and we need to, as an industry, collaborate on trying to help each other with the demand signals. Because I know at the moment, whether you're a hyperscaler, you're building out your network, you're building out data centers, we're all trying to predict what the demand is so we know where to deploy this infrastructure. And actually, in an uncertain time, it means we need to work much more closely together to kind of share our views on where demand's going. I'm constantly thinking, am I the only one who is not sure how this is going to play out? The reassuring thing is that when I talk to everyone, actually no one really knows, but collectively we probably have a pretty good idea. So it's trying to get that collective view and share earlier where we think these trends are going so we can kind of, in this time of unprecedented demand, deploy our dollars in the right spots.
You pretty much started on a few other questions with it, because let me follow up with that is really, as you said, Will, how does this, and we'll go specifically in the data center industry, is a lot of this kind of leads into, is how does the data center industry mature? As you say, sharing in the future value of growth, is it the cycles of the industry, is it the power? How do you see, and what your thoughts are, and what you're kind of seeing in, how to invest in this next phase? And I almost call it data center 3.0, that future around land, power, water, resources, and that could be, staffing resources.
I was more quite interested to what this chap's going to say as well. What I know for sure is that if you're a data center operator, for you to have an enduring right to exist, you have to build smarter, faster, cheaper than the hyperscalers can do themselves. And I think that's completely achievable, by the way, because I think as an industry that it needs specialization, and specialization will be for the benefit of everybody over time. So how do I think the industry will mature? I just think the processes, systems, supply chains, construction methodologies will just get better and better and better and better. And then we will have a lower cost product, which ultimately will be better for everybody in terms of the downstream effects.
I think I'll add one thing to it, right? So it's faster, smarter, cheaper, but it's also sustainably. Right? You have to. These data centers are not there for 6 months. They're not there for 1 year. You can get a quick deal done, but then later the community could push back. So you need to, frankly, bring your own power, water, grid connection, the jobs that, frankly, people are hoping for when they allow you to build that data center. And it's easy to take from the community, but if you don't do it in a sustainable way, in a community that is welcoming, then that basic data center, which is intended to last for 30 years, is going to have a very tough time. So I think infrastructure investors and all of us know all our assets we can't take home. So they have to be integrated into that community, and so you have to choose these things very, very carefully.
We have actually one advantage that energy is probably a bigger sector for us than digital actually. So we have a more than 100 gigawatt pipeline of power that we're working on delivering over the next couple of years. And a lot of that power needs to be additional, that's coming to the grid or on site to power data centers. Otherwise you are taking it from alternative uses in the end. which, data centers don't create that many jobs, right? There's a few engineers. It depends what else comes with it. So I think we're very focused on developing, getting our companies to work together. Doesn't come naturally for us. I think I'm spending a lot of time on getting all the companies together and building a product, that's helping to actually solve that problem and make data centers a kind of sustainable part of the local community. You'll feed the heat eventually into the heating systems. We're doing that in Europe. It's not so easy in the US. Really upgrade the local water infrastructure, upgrade the local communities, and create additional jobs. I think that's going to be key to sustain this growth. Otherwise, you will lose. Like for example, in Ireland, no more permits for data centers. You don't want that to happen. We need to come up with a long-term viable model.
So really, just to follow on, and I'll start with you, is because of this power generation, is this going to be the limiting factor in the coming years for the data center space? And then does the industry as a whole have to kind of bring in all the power generation, the power suppliers, or the governments and everybody to the table and really start talking about the next 10, 20 years of development?
I mean, first I want to start with, we're actually in the best time I've ever seen in infrastructure. There's never been a more exciting time, right? We are rebuilding what energy means. Energy consumption has been flat the past 20 years. It's doubling by 2050. I mean, the opportunity that comes with that, the problems also, but firstly, look at it as a huge infrastructure opportunity. So I couldn't be more excited to have that problem. I do think power is the constraining factor in many markets at the moment. I think it will get solved over time. You have customers that are able to pay, what it takes. I think it actually translates into a huge opportunity to upgrade the way we're generating power, using power. We haven't had that in the past. Costs had to be spread between a lot of consumers. Consumer prices have been increasing. That's not sustainable. So you've seen an inflation. But now you have a unique window where there is a new, AI business that will generate a lot of additional revenue, save a lot of costs, and with customers that are able to invest in what's needed in 10 years. So I could not be more excited actually about the opportunity out there. And all that while we're still digitalizing, but to rebuild the entire energy system that we're working on, that happens once every 100 years. So it's the most exciting time in infrastructure.
I do think it's a fundamental change. I mean, as you just mentioned, we are digitizing every economic process, right? At the Industrial Revolution 120 years ago today, this is sort of a parallel in the digitization versus industrialization. That's the scale at which we need to be thinking. But it is really interesting. I think there will be very long-term investments on energy infrastructure. I think you'll see things like nuclear, small reactors. You're going to see long-term development strategies. I also think, though, you're going to need to see a lot more efficiency or strategic sort of investment around the system. And what I mean by that is that the gigawatts of demand is not going to be linear to gigawatts of new data center capacity. You're going to have to start thinking about things like efficiency at a chip level. You're going to think about all the excess capacity that exists. Most data centers aren't running at 90+%. Yeah. They're running at mid-50s, right, or less. And so how do we squeeze out and utilize that energy, which is the most efficient way to bring capacity online? It's interesting, the US electrical grid, two people mentioned, has been flat for 20 years, but GDP in the US has grown over 5%, right? It's because they've constantly been finding greater efficiency in the system. I think you're going to find that in a very specific way in the data center infrastructure arena to actually meet this kind of challenge. The top players we have, as you look at these CapEx numbers, I wonder how sustainable it's going to be. At some point, you see Microsoft talk about $80 billion in 2025 for CapEx. It was $25 billion, by the way, 3 years ago, right? They've almost increased their CapEx by 300%. That's, for any company, that's a massive number. And if you look at that entire list that was up earlier of the $250 rough billion being spent, comparing that to the size of the opportunity we're looking at, the trillions of dollars to achieve gigawatts of GPU deployment, these numbers, I think, become very difficult to manage for any company, for any group of companies, for any industry. And so you're going to have to see some smart allocation of dollars. I do think, though, stepping back, that's actually really good for everyone in this room. I don't know who else in the room, I can't see, but for us, it's really good. And what I mean by that is there's going to need to be a greater relationship with external infrastructure partners. candidly, if I'm a large technology company, the building isn't how I differentiate my go-to-market. That's not where I add and create value. It's in greater software design, it's a greater engineering of technology solutions, creating of applications on top of that infrastructure. I think it's going to see an increasing role for players like us to deliver a solution around digital infrastructure, around fiber, data centers, and the component pieces, so they can focus on the value-add business. So again, I think all these things come together consistent with what you're saying about the size of this opportunity. I just think there's going to be a lot of levers that need to get pulled to get there.
I don't think I agree with the sort of the unprecedented opportunity, the 1 in 100 years, I think was the time frame you used. I mean, the good news is that necessity tends to breed innovation and great results, and we know that economies and societies will benefit if there's abundant, reliable, cheap, and clean power. So I think because of the pinch point we're in right now, we're having to rethink the energy system all the way through to the digital ecosystem again. And it was really only because we're being forced to. Otherwise, I think we would have stuck with the status quo, and there's a lot of systems in there that aren't optimized. So the good news is it's going to be very, very painful for the next few years as we try and work through the systems. The sort of the optimistic side of me says if we do get through that, because we have to, on the other side, potentially we've got a much more efficient energy system and digital ecosystem.
Yeah.
Look, the only observation I'd add to is that, right now it's power, but as the snake moves through, it'll be something else, right? So it'll be water, it'll be your grid, it may be workforce, right? So it's a big change. It's all positive. And I think Bill showed some charts on the winners and the size of the investments that people require to do it. So you should do it collaboratively. Having said that, I think it's also a necessity. None of these players, frankly, the trillions of dollars of market cap would exist if their businesses would not take this pivot correctly, right? So every pivot, like the internet, had winners and losers, and so will this, right? So, but the scale of the investment that is required to, frankly, have a seat at the table, to actually be a part of this AI thing, is actually quite large. And I think overall, it will benefit society in the sense that it will force us to upgrade our water systems, our power systems, our grid systems, our education systems, and that's fantastic.
I appreciate that. So, John, one thing is that, with your access in the data center space as a firm, what is the relevance or impact of owning multiple platforms for you? I mean, you've got multiple platforms across different regions. You get a lot of, different. Does it help you get access? Does it help you kind of push through with the hyperscalers or the governments? How does the portfolio companies cross-collaborate? And does that help you drive?
One, so without making this a Digital Bridge commercial, which I'm happy to do, there's a focus here about creating an ecosystem, a community of executives and companies that work together, right? So Zayo, that Jan and I both invest in, fiber business, understanding where we're building fiber really helps to know where data centers need to go, right? So there's a lot of great, really constructive dialogue around that. So that's very valuable. But I think the big thing for me when it comes to investing in the space is focus. What is it that companies do best, and how do we help them focus on that? Sometimes it's a geography, so you have a business that actually excels in a market where the CEO and the executive team understands that location, the politics, the geography, right? How to navigate in that specific location. So you don't get hometowned, as they say, right? In other cases, it's thematic. Are they focusing on very large triple net type buildings, or is it one where it's edge and they're focusing on different communities closer to the distribution of inference, right? So there's a different strategy for different markets. I think for us, it's about making sure we allow every company to find the path where they can be most successful. And again, the data center term specifically, it's like cars. There's a lot of different kind of cars. Sometimes you get a truck, sometimes it's a race car, right? And so you need to figure out what the solution is you're trying to bring, and then make sure you back the company. So.
All right. And Jan, as John mentioned, even owning, partnering on a large scale fiber company, like from an AI model, and you talked about AI. How are you guys, as your firm and you, looking across AI models for fiber, power, and data centers? So not just saying, everybody's doing inference or everybody's doing development for AI chips in the data centers, but how are you leveraging that across your whole ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's key to get the companies to work well together. You know, we're now starting to co-locate the data centers next to our renewable power companies. You know, they have got great connections, of course, as well. At the same time, we just invested in a behind-the-meter microgrid business that will focus on developing on-site solutions. So we have across, you know, not just digital infra, or not even just infra, we have more than 250 companies. We have a great network between them. They share best practices. I think that's key to our success. On the AI front specifically, I mean, the big opportunities are around getting, you know, a package done somehow between data centers, fiber, and energy. That's where I spent a lot of my time working with the customers. You know, data centers, you know, they would like to own if they can, generally. Fiber, sometimes, usually not. Energy, they definitely don't want to own. So, you know, for me, that's really the biggest differentiator. Can we help them with energy more than others? And then, you know, attach it in some cases and others not with the data centers and make it easy for them to work with us. Today, it's still, you know, they tell me always, you have all these great companies, they do all the great things, but it's, you know, they don't collaborate.
Yeah.
So that's the key success in our mind that we have, and one of the advantages that we're across many areas. I think it's turned, to John's point, I mean, it's not so much the data centers going now where the fiber is, actually the other way around. So,
Yeah.
you know, Randy's giving Steve a heads up, you know, you need to build fiber there. There's a new data center coming there.
But that goes
Will
back
should
to
do
the
that too, by the way.
He is. There's a lot of great dialogue. Steve knows everybody. He's the great connector, literally and figuratively. But I think to that point, it's interesting because you mentioned the customers. What the ultimate customer here is looking for, I believe, is a solution, right? They're not just looking for a building or a fiber out. They want someone to help them create the infrastructure they need to deliver AI or cloud solutions. And that's a little bit more complicated, right? Someone once described it to me as you're looking for a gourmet meal, not like a side of beef, right? It's a different product. And so I think that's important.
I would add that, you know, it's actually helpful because if you think about power, so we have about 36 gigawatts of power, including hydro plants and solar and actually gas-fired plants. Not all of it is dispatched all the time. So many of the plants don't run on 100% dispatch because the community doesn't need it. So getting these data centers co-located inside the power plants, which we have done, is actually a fantastic idea. It's actually net beneficial to the community, lowers the cost of capital for them because they get power that frankly would be cheaper because the plant is now running much more efficiently. And in many cases, including in Ireland where we have done it, we have promised the grid that we'll keep the power plant alive for another 10 years before retirement, just because the data center would benefit from it. And the data center hyperscaler in this case is paying for it, right? So there's a win situation here that you can design.
I think one question that you and I spoke about as we kind of helped on this is really about, you know, and really kind of, as you say, not just, you know, the entree, but the full suite. So how do hyperscaler expectations for third-party data center partners? You know, is it that kind of full solution in the way you guys are thinking about that next investment, or how you grow your current companies, and what are they thinking about?
And you know, it is interesting. I'm sure many people in this room are doing business with the hyperscalers, and I think overall the hyperscalers have been incredibly beneficial for driving the industry forward and have been really positive players. Sometimes, I don't know what the analogy is though, when I sometimes think about some of our smaller businesses negotiating with the hyperscalers, it's either like a mouse dancing with an elephant, right? That just inadvertently the elephant could stand on the mouse and completely squash it and not even notice and keep on dancing. So there's that sort of feeling going on. The other one is, I sometimes think about you're wrestling a tiger, and as long as the tiger's well fed, it's not going to take a bite out of you. And at the moment, the hyperscalers are well fed. Their businesses are booming, but the moment they're a little bit hungry, watch out, because you know they can take an arm off in an instant. So what does that all mean? It means actually the industry needs to mature, and I think that's a good thing both for the industry and for the hyperscalers. And by mature, I mean it needs to consolidate a little bit. We need bigger operators, more coordinated operators. So whether that's combining the utilities with the power generation with the data centers, so you can actually show up at the table and not get squashed or not get your arm bitten off. And ultimately, that's a good thing because then you're bringing more capital, you're bringing more firepower, you're bringing holistic solutions to the customer as well, which is ultimately what they want.
So really, I can even ask Jan or Will, when you talk about capital, really, it's the risk-sharing approach to deals. Are you looking at more partnerships? And then we can do a follow-on on LPs and all that. But just from the players that are out there, do you look at on trying to do more partnerships? Is it cleaner to go it alone, or try to do, as you say, data center fiber, other things that are out there in the space to take a little bit of risk off as you make that investment, and also from the capital deployed aspect?
Yeah, I think we're not trying to like throw it all together and have one team try to execute on everything. It's quite, I've spoken at many panels about convergence. I personally believe execution is the most important in this sector, delivering on time, putting your customer first. I think that becomes difficult when you combine too many different things. Fiber is very different than data centers. Energy is obviously completely different. So I would not be looking to in any way combine it all under one umbrella. And I don't think our investors and LPs are looking for that as well. They want to pick where they have exposure. I think there is a flight kind of to top quality managers in the sector. Most data center investments have gone well, but there are some much more problematic digital infra investments that haven't gone as well. So people are really looking kind of for experience there, we don't see a reason to combine it.
Okay. Well, it's not going back to the old telco of vertically integrated, as you would say. Kind of from that perspective, it's best to be a specialist as a fiber operator or data center operator.
Yeah.
That's our view, yeah. You need to have a lot more customers when you run a fiber business than just data centers, right? They're the cream on top, but you cannot run an entire business just on that.
John, a little bit of a different angle on that same question, but would you look at JVs with those guys, like a telco that says they need to expand on a fiber partnership from that perspective, or doing more partnerships with the hyperscalers directly, or setting up a new vehicles or across your businesses?
Well, I think the great thing about being a private investor is we get to be creative, right? There's no requirement that I can't try to sort of solve around. So I think partnerships, collaborations, right, working together at an asset level or corporate level, I think is all possible. On the fiber side, I think you've seen interesting collaboration about bringing fiber into campuses. I think that's really interesting. As Jan said, it's a broader business, but we're seeing tremendous growth to think about the data required between different cloud and AI campuses to support that, which I think is creating a really interesting opportunity. And I think you're going to see great opportunities there. I think the partnering with customers, the end customers, whether it's large enterprises or hyperscale or cloud or AI, I think all of that is got to be part of the solution. Again, creativity should be the approach here.
Yeah, I think for our industry, partnerships with private capital are a great idea to go forward, particularly when there's a degree of uncertainty about how an industry is shaping. The other nice thing about it, and we're in partnerships today around the world, and they've gone really, really well. And in part because when you sit down as an infrastructure investor with a corporate, you can step back and say, hey, which risks am I okay taking and pricing really well? And which risks actually are you better taking and pricing really well? Because you may have more ways of adapting, adjusting to that. So I think actually partnerships will be key to moving the industry forward. And like you say, we can be creative because we're private investors and come up with the structures that work for both parties.
And risk sharing is, I think, the right way to think about it. That's really what we're trying to solve for, whether it's the size of the risk, the quantum of dollars, the locations, the complexity, all these things go into it. And I think even if you think about the end customers, there's so much uncertainty as to what's going to happen going forward. I think there's a real moment right now, a bit of a turning point or inflection point in this industry where broadly everyone's trying to think about what happens next. What is the next step function as we get to digital economy 3.0, I think you said in the beginning.
No, that is true. As we kind of still find out where we're kind of moving to, as the old Gretzky saying of going where the puck is moving and not where it is today. I think, look, I wanted to ask one last question or two questions to finish off. And I think really we'll go to Gautam, it's like LP allocation. Are they still excited about digital? I mean, you guys have raised a ton of capital with the funds, with the co-invests, for the portcos, is it still, from a global perspective, do they still love the industry and like the kind of metrics of these long-term leases, good customers, a quality type of investments?
Yeah, look, absolutely. So I think if you go back maybe 5-10 years ago, the exciting thing about digital infrastructure was that the risk was orthogonal to energy or anything else, right? So not correlated. So people thought, hey, there's something that actually enhances my portfolio, and it was a fantastic asset to own. And the results were good, right? They were great. I think as you enter into the next thing, it's about picks and shovels. So AI is a big game changer. You read about it. And so in order to participate in it, frankly, participating in that value chain, whether it be energy or data centers or fiber or towers, it's all great. It's a good way to get that exposure without having to decide which particular AI company will survive and which will not, right? So I think that's the second phase. I'm a little cautious on it because at the end, all these investors, and frankly, most of our funds are closed-end funds. So we need to exit. It may take 10 years, it may take 12 years, we can add a lot of value, but in the end, these need an ultimate home. And I think there have been excesses in this industry. If you look at the integrated telecom ROIC, it's been 4-5%, so abysmal. You should have just bought bonds. And so I think it remains to be seen how this next stage comes. I note that there are a lot of big, massive campuses, $10 billion, $20 billion announcements. And sometimes the cap rates are similar to what you would get in Virginia, and I wonder, right? I mean, you're in the middle of nowhere. That data center cap rate, in my mind at least, deserves something more. So proof is always in the pudding, and I think with our LPs, it's about actually delivered return dollars, right? And I think for this next stage, they have trusted us with the capital. Capital is available. They want to build. They want to participate. But we just want to make sure that the pricing dynamics, whether it be fiber or data centers, is reflective, frankly, of what pensioners want, which is a return on that capital.
Okay. Well,
I mean, just to add, I think, as I mentioned, I spend a lot of time talking to our clients, and there's certainly 3-4 years ago, middle of COVID, there was a real hype for digital infra. Lots of funds got raised, and everything was incredibly expensive. We actually slowed down investing as prices went up because they didn't seem to make sense. And in a lot of different markets, there have been investments that went wrong in the past 2 years. More on the fiber side, on the fiber to the home side, than on the data center side. So I think one really has to differentiate. I think now everything that has AI on it is really experiencing a pickup in demand again. More broadly, digital infra is there's still some hesitance, I think, with some of our clients. And I think we need to all deliver the returns we promised to kind of address that.
Yeah. All right, so last question before we move on to the break. And it's a broad question, we'll just do it pretty quickly, is if we gave you $1 million each, so for your personal accounts, so your PA investing, where would you be allocating capital over the next 12 months? Digital adjacencies, other sectors, and please no selling at portcos, no block trades. No. And if you're allocating to everybody, some pre-IPOs, that's okay, but we'll leave that for afterwards. But John, maybe get started. Where would you be putting money over the next 12 months?
Well, okay, first off, there's one obvious arbitrage. I'd buy $1 million of Hermes handbags and resell them immediately the next day because that market is just ridiculous. But if not that, I actually think there's some really interesting fiber plays right now which are not correctly priced. I think there's so much demand there amongst some of these campuses. I think you could buy some interesting assets in that space. If I was going to be a little bit out of the box, that's sort of a place you could go to. The other would be battery technology. Do I get my 3 choices? My third $1 million is battery technology. If someone's got a great battery technology, that's going to be really disruptive, and there's a ton of value there to bring and unlock green energy. So,
Will?
You won't be surprised by my answer other than Hermes bags. What we're trying to do every day is back massive thematics. So digitization is one of them, and then we're trying to pick the very best businesses within them, right? And we have the benefit of doing a lot of diligence before we invest. As a personal investor, you don't get that benefit. So what can you do? I would stay behind the big thematics. So I would stay allocated against digital and energy right now, because I think there's a lot to be gained over the next few years.
Jan, and then Gautam will finish off with you.
The best ROIC clearly is made by supporting the right president. So that happened already. Elon did a pretty good job on that. I think you have to put your money where your mouth is. I would put it all into energy, on-site generation, energy transition more in how do we actually get all the power that's needed to support the demand. And that's what I have actually done over the past few years. It's done pretty well.
And Gautam will finish off.
I think the reality is that some simple things like getting a substation, getting a turbine, it's all sold out. Slots are sold out for 2 years, slots are sold out for 4 years. So if you can get your hands on those assets or that sector, frankly, in another country that probably does not have the same demand, and be simply in the import-export business, I think you'd do fine. So I think, and by the way, it's not just about AI. There is a massive reshoring of jobs and manufacturing, which is one of the reasons why the grid was flat. And I think benefiting on those tailwinds is probably a way to go. You could also just buy beers with it, right, for everybody.
There we go. Well, thank you, gentlemen. John, Gautam, Jan, Will, thank you again. Appreciate it.